Pauline, storyteller from Fizzy's Fantastic Parties here. Now, I am just back from Aaron's birthday party and I have just remembered that I promised him a story about Roald Dahl. Now, we were having so much fun making slime and splitting atoms and all sorts of other sciencey things, and I completely forgot about this. So Aaron, I'm sorry, I thought I'd make a little video for you. Now, I'm always keeping an eye out for new stories, and I was sitting in the car and I was listening to Chris Evans when he did the breakfast show on BBC Radio 2, and he was interviewing people from a theatre company called Les Enfants Terribles, who are based in London, I think. I hope I pronounced that correctly. Now, what they do is they take a play, and as you're watching the play up on the stage, you get fed food from the play, and they wanted to do a Roald Dahl play. Which one did they choose? They chose the book The Twits. Now, if you're a big Roald Dahl fan, like I am, you'll know that there's lots of really disgusting food mentioned in there when Mr. and Mrs. Twit are cooking, and there's mouldy delight and bird pie and worm spaghetti. Well, people who are going to be watching this were going to get served all this delicious food. But there was a problem. Children seeing would get something tasty that's mentioned, but there's no alcohol mentioned in the book. And they wanted some wine or some beer or something, and they weren't quite sure how to go about it. What would they create? What could they make? So they contacted a company called Bompass and Parr, who brew beer. And they sat and they scratched their chins and they wondered how on earth they could make something disgusting enough that Roald Dahl would approve of. And around them, and I hope they'll pardon me if I'm romanticising this story a lot, they had lots and lots of pictures of Roald Dahl in his workshop. Now, some of you might know that, there he is. At the bottom of his garden in his cottage, he had a workshop, which is where he wrote some of his books. And he always sat in this same armchair. So there he is, writing one of his early on books. And later on, look, here he is, all cozied up in his sleeping bag on the phone, writing another book. Now, the reason he always sat in that chair was that he had a bad back from an accident. And the chair had been specially adjusted so it would be comfortable for him when he was writing. So they looked at this and they looked at the early photos of him writing, and then they looked at the older photos and they saw that's the same armchair. Now, I can imagine what went through their minds. They thought to themselves, was that chair ever washed? Was there any bits of dandruff that went down the back? Was there any sweat? Basically, were there any skin cells? Was there any bacteria? Now, bacteria are tiny, tiny little creatures, microbes, kind of like germs or bacteria, although not all bacteria are germs. Would there still be any bacteria on that armchair? So they contacted the people that look after the shed now. It's now a little museum that you can visit, I believe. And they said, is there any chance we can take swabs of his armchair? And I'm sure the people that were asked permission for this thought, okay, why? They said, we're looking for some of Roald Dahl's bacteria. Oh yeah, he would be up for that. So off they went. And they took their little swabs, which is kind of like wiping it with a cotton wool bud. And they came back to the lab and they managed to produce some kind of bacteria that would act as the yeast that went into the ale that they produced. And there you go. They made beer, because yeast is one of the very important ingredients that gives beer its fizz and creates the alcohol within the beer. They managed to make beer using some of the skin cells and bacteria from Roald Dahl, from his body. And frankly, I think that if he was still alive, he would be absolutely delighted at that. So there you go, a science story, a microbiology story for you about Roald Dahl. And I do hope that any of the companies that I mentioned, Bompass and Parr and Les Enfants Terribles, I do hope that I got your story right, but I was so taken with it when I heard you being interviewed on the radio that I sat in my driveway for an extra 10 minutes to get the full story. Okay, I hope you had a great birthday, Aaron, and take care, everyone. Bye-bye.